Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. Today is episode 4 in my series for growing tomatoes for new gardeners. And today we're going to talk about top dressing, water-soluble feeding. Try and make it simple. So top dressing is basically putting down any materials on top of the soil around your tomato plants. Tomato plants send out lots of surface roots, and they will cover a garden space. You put down the materials on top of the soil. Rain washes nutrients into the root system. It's really good to do. Now you can do it once a month. You can do it in the beginning when you plant the tomato. You can do it mid-season. I like to do it when I plant my tomato plants and then when they get to about this size. And it's typically called when they first start to flower or fruit. You can see in there a tomato, and there are a couple more up here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right in there, another one up there. But this plant now is maybe almost 3 feet tall. The one over here, same size, doesn't have any fruits yet, starting to flower. But this is generally a good time to do a sort of mid-season top dressing. Now, you're going to put down granular fertilizer. We're also going to do a water-soluble or insoluble feed. So we'll cover top dressing and soluble feedings. Let your granular fertilizer use any kind. They're all basically the same ingredients, or you could use a compost. I'll show you how to use both of those, or you can use a combination of both. Now the whole key is you don't want to pile in your organic fertilizer, your compost around the stem, so leave a couple inches around there. So if we were going to do the granular, a couple tablespoonfuls, and you just sprinkle it around. It's going to be on top of the surface. We'll throw some back there, and then some over here on this side. It's going to be on the surface. The surface roots of the tomato plants will get that as it rains. Now, that was a couple tablespoons scattered around. Just make it look something like that. If you're going to use compost, manures, combination of both, make sure it's fully composted down. And you really just want to put down about a ½ an inch all over the surface. And I would just cover that whole space. And that's a nice top dressing. Compost is a nice low and steady NP&K. It's well below a 111 NP&K. So you're going to give your plants what they need, and it's going to slowly draw. They're going to slowly draw on what's being put on the surface. That's all you do for a top dressing. You could do it when you put the plants in the first time, lightly top dress it. You could do it about now, mid-season when they have tomatoes and flowers, and you can do it again towards the end of the season when they're really producing and you want to give them an extra boost. Now, to make it even a little more confusing, you could do this once a month. You're not going to harm your plants by just doing a slow and low top dressing. All right, I finished putting down about a ½ an inch to 1 inch of compost around the tomato plants. Now, the difference between compost and the granular organic fertilizers is compost really feeds your plant, your soil life, your microbes, microbiology, worms. Also builds structure. It's just wonderful for your soil. Organic granular is great. It's in an insoluble form, which means it needs to be broken down by the soil life, and then it renders the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium into a form your plant can use. Nice, slow, steady feeding. That's what the top dressing is all about, slow and steady. Now you have your soluble fertilizers, which means they mix readily in water. This is fish emulsion. Just follow the instructions on the bottle. And the NP&K in water-soluble fertilizers can be used immediately by your tomato plants. That means as soon as it contacts the roots can pull it in. It can go into the plant system. And you can also water the leaves. Your plants can take a foliar feed, which means they'll draw in some fertilizer that way. So I like to soak the leaves, even though you may hear don't soak the tomato plant leaves. Kind of true, depending if you have crazy diseases in your area, but when it rains, your plants get soaked. Don't worry about it. So I do a quick soaking of the leaves. I just want to show you my process. And then maybe a ½ a gallon right into the base when the plants are this tall. When you're growing your plants in your earth beds, you can give them a water-soluble feeding, I don't know, once or twice a month. If you've been taking care of them, they have plenty of fertilizer. In containers, you really want to feed them when they're about this size every 10 to 14 days When they're smaller, maybe, every 3 weeks or 4 weeks. It's really based on the size of the plant when they're in containers. There's not a lot of soil life in container mix, and your plants will suck the life out of it. All right, let me give you a tour of the tomatoes that I'm growing, and then I will show you container tomato plants too and talk about those. So now that it's warmed, and it's been like 90 here for the past week, my tomato plants are taking off. These are cherry types that are going to be woven through the cattle panel trellis, and they're going to just grow all the way up there. The plants are taking off. In the next episode, I will talk about dealing with pests and diseases, spraying. There's a tomato plant doing quite well. 3 more in here. They're all taking off. They're all really approaching that size where I'm going to do the top dressing that I just showed you. They're going to get a water-soluble feeding. You can do both in the same day. But they're really, really growing nicely. Another grouping of 4. Spacing, 2 feet apart is pretty good. 3 feet apart if you're just getting started. It makes tending a little bit easier. All really depends on what you want to do. And this is an area that I'm also growing up the cattle panel, but there are the 4 cherry tomatoes here on the right. There are actually, or maybe there's 5 on that side, and there's 4 on this side. You can't really see them because they're mixed in with the peas. The peas will die out soon, but it's going to be 9 cherry tomato plants all growing through here, so I can walk through, pick a bowl of mixed cherry tomatoes. In this space we have the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 plants, yeah, right here, and then we have 4 indeterminate varieties right in the back, and this is one big tomato space. Cherries towards me, larger tomatoes in the back. All right, let's walk over to the container tomatoes. All right, let's stop at this container plant. It's flowering. It has a little tomato on there, so it's really ready for the top dressing. And it's the same way. Here, let me get rid of the weeds. That's about a tablespoon, tablespoon and a half, and just sprinkle it on the outer part of the container. Stay away from the stem. And this guy hasn't been pruned yet, so I'm just going to get in. And remember, for pruning, we're taking the bottom leaves slowly, creating an air space. Helps manage disease and problems. This is mulch to keep the soil from splashing up. And that's enough pruning right now. As it gets bigger, I'll remove a couple more of the leaves. Same thing. You can soak the leaves real quick with your water soluble. This is fish emulsion. And then this is about a 20-gallon container, about half a gallon. And the container plants you want to do every 10 to 14 days with the water-soluble fertilizer when they get to this size and larger. And the top dressing, you can just do it as frequently as you're doing your earth beds. You know, it could be twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. It all really depends on what you want to do. All right, let's wrap up with taking a look at some fabric pots that have tomatoes in them. And finally, I have a few more tomato plants in here. Remember, the top dressing is a slow and low feed over the season for your tomato plants. They'll absorb it through their surface roots. The water-soluble fertilizer is for a quick feed that gets right into the plant system. Growing tomatoes in 4-gallon pots back there, 4 or 5-gallon pots. These are dwarf types. They're not going to get as tall as the determinate varieties. So just make sure you match the container size to the mature size of your tomato plants. Thanks so much for watching. Hope this gives you some confidence for feeding and taking care of your tomato plants. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com, and good luck this year.